Good afternoon, and thank you all for attending our first webinar for 2025. As Helen just noted, I'm Victoria Melendez, a JASA Program Committee member, working with Amy Poster, Allison Tolman, and Leah Robinson. For those of you who may be new to JASA, the organization promotes the study and appreciation of Japanese art, and just finished celebrating its 50th anniversary, for which it organized a major exhibition entitled Meiji Modern, 50 Years of New Japan. That opened at the Asia Society in New York in 2023, and then went on to the University of Chicago's Art Museum, and then to the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, where it just closed on September 15th. We hope that you all had the opportunity to see this extraordinary exhibition and the beautiful catalog that accompanied the show, which is still available for purchase through the JASA website. Now, without further ado, please allow me to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Saul Jung. Dr. Jung joined the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art in 2021 as the inaugural Shirley Z. Johnson Assistant Curator of Japanese Art. She oversees the museum's collection of prehistoric to contemporary Japanese ceramics, as well as lacquerware, metalwork, and textiles. Dr. Jung received her BA with distinction in History of Art at the University of Pennsylvania and her MA and PhD in Art and Archaeology from Princeton University. She has examined the reception of Korean tea bowls called Korai Chawan in Japan during the 16th century. Dr. Jung's recent exhibitions include knotted clay, baku ceramics, as well as striking objects, contemporary Japanese metalwork, and also Japanese art from the collection. Thank you, Dr. Jung.
Victoria, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and also thank you to the JASA Programming Committee for inviting me to give the first talk for the webinar series for 2025. Happy New Year to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Saul Jung, as Victoria introduced me. I'm the Shirley Z. Johnson Assistant Curator of Japanese Art at the National Museum of Asian Art at the Smithsonian. It's a very cold day in DC today, and I hope that everyone's keeping warm and safe wherever you are. So I'd like to begin by introducing Shirley Z. Johnson, which has been mentioned a couple times now. She is the very generous collector, antitrust attorney, autism advocate, and former trustee of the National Museum of Asian Art, who generously endowed my position, and also, along with that gift, gave a historic bequest, which included not only her excellent collection of contemporary Japanese metalwork, but also a treasure trove of archival materials, as well as generous funding to support further research on contemporary Japanese metalwork. She was a true pioneer in this field of contemporary Japanese metalwork, which she began collecting around 2009. And you may be aware of her article, which was published posthumously in Impressions Journal, number 44, part 2 of the double issue in the fall of 2023. And you'll notice that the work that is on the cover of Impressions, what you're seeing as the base of this work is actually the hero piece, the so-called hero piece of the exhibition that I curated, Striking Objects, Contemporary Japanese Metalwork. And this work is by Seki Yashiro, who was a living national treasure in hammering as designated by the Japanese government. This is an image of Seki Yashiro, which was published in this article. So you may be wondering, how did she come to collect contemporary Japanese metalwork? What was Shirley Johnson's journey as a collector? And I think it's really important to think about her trajectory as someone who is very deeply invested in the research and appreciation for East Asian art, because she actually began as a collector of Chinese textiles. This is one of the works in her collection that came to our museum. It is in the Freer collection now. It's a formal court dress for a top rank prince. The cloth that you see, it's difficult to tell based upon this photograph, but it's a very finely woven silk gauze, so it would have been for the summer, and it has this resplendent embroidery of dragons. And you'll notice if you look closely that these dragons have 5 claws as opposed to 4, which was the normal number of claws for a typical princely robe. So this means that the emperor gave special permission for this individual to don a robe with 5 claws. And you'll see in this slide here that the robe was on view in the 2001 exhibition, Worshipping the Ancestors, Chinese Commemorative Portraits at the National Museum of Asian Art, which was curated by Jan Stewart, my colleague in the curatorial department here, who is the Melvin R. Seaton Curator of Chinese Art. And in fact, Jan was actually the one who brought Shirley to our museum because Shirley was interested in collecting textiles, primarily from the Ming and the Qing dynasties. They happened to meet and get to know each other, and Jan slowly convinced Shirley to come to our museum and be a part of our friends group, which is a donor circle at our museum of very loyal patrons and supporters of the museum. And eventually, Shirley became a trustee. And you'll see here, I apologize for the poor quality of this image, but it's a beautiful double egret badge, which was for a civil service servant of 6th rank. And it's a special technique, kusu weaving, a tapestry weaving technique, where the weft threads are discontinuous. So they do not extend from selvage to selvage, but in specific areas, which means that on the other side, if you flip this rank badge, the exact same design is visible. So it's a very intricate weaving technique. And in her collection also, now in the Freer collection, are these beautiful embroidered badges from the Qing dynasty as well. And we have a few of these examples where it's a pair. You can see that the badge to the left has a line going down the middle because it would be for the front of the robe. So the robe would open in the front, down the middle. And then you see that the rank badge to the right, it's one continuous scene, but it's the same design as the front. So it's a matching pair. So Shirley really had an eye for detail, for quality. She was meticulous when it came to research about these textiles, not only in terms of their art historical significance and their cultural significance, but also in terms of technique and also conservation. She was extremely passionate about conservation. So in terms of her collecting journey, she began with Chinese textiles. And then at one point, she decided that she was ready to move on to something new, mostly because, well, she had a very, very keen eye for quality. So when she noticed that she wasn't finding the Chinese textiles that were meeting her standards in terms of quality, she became interested in looking at other objects, specifically from Japan. And this is just the range of the kind of metalworks that we have in our collection, in the Freer collection. You'll notice that when it comes to metalwork in Japan, there are about 3 rough categories, historic categories of metalworking. Metalworking that is related to arms and armor. So the example all the way to the left is a pommel containing a design of a phoenix head made out of gilt bronze from the Kofun period, so very, very old. And then we also have in the middle Buddhist implements. So a lot of Buddhist sacred implements, sculptures, decorative elements tend to use metal. And of course, to the right, we have an example of a cast iron tea kettle, which would have been used to boil water for Japanese tea culture for chanoyu. So these are, I think, the kind of 3 broad categories of historic metalworking. So Shirley wasn't necessarily interested in these historic examples, but there's something about modern and contemporary Japanese metalworking that caught her eye when she traveled to Japan for the first time. So she was encouraged to look at ceramics, which is, of course, very popular, very renowned field of Japanese art, but it was really the metal that spoke to her. And about 32 of the Meiji period works that she collected are actually now at the Walters Art Museum. So this is a pair of vases made in 1900, around 1900 in Japan. And it's beautifully hammered and contains these motifs, these naturalistic, hyper-realistic motifs of chrysanthemum. And it's signed by Seisai, and also has a stamp saying that this was made by Seisai for the Mitsukoshi department store. And the reason why I bring up this example actually is because we have one example of a Meiji period hammered silver flower container that was also made for Mitsukoshi, but it doesn't have a seal, unlike a seal of the maker. It just has a stamp for Mitsukoshi, unlike the example at the Walters Art Museum. So even though the bulk of this collection of metalwork that came to our museum is really focused on post-war Japanese metalworking from 1940 onwards, there are a few pieces from the Meiji period and the Taisho period which Shirley felt was appropriate for a collection in terms of contextualizing contemporary Japanese metalworking. And the reason why she actually shifted from looking at Meiji and then into post-war and contemporary metalworking is because she felt that there's something that was more aesthetically Japanese about the contemporary Japanese works that she was seeing in Japan. She felt that the Meiji period works were too Victorian, and of course that makes sense given the fact that these works that were made for export, that were made for World's Fair, was catering to this Western idea of art and aesthetics as Japan was entering the international stage as a modern nation state. And what you see to the right here actually is a screen capture of this very silver flower container that's in our collection. It was 3D scanned by the Digitization Projects Office at the Smithsonian. So if you click on the link that I believe has been or will be shared in the chat, you can actually manipulate this model, look at it from 360 degrees. And there are also some hotspots with information about how this object was made and its significance. And in terms of the actual contemporary works that make that form the bulk of the Shirley Johnson bequest, this is an excellent example of a cast vessel titled "The Crossing of Crying Cranes" by living national treasure Nakagawa Mamoru. So Nakagawa Mamoru is arguably one of the most famous contemporary Japanese metalworkers right now. He was, I think, the second youngest person to be designated as a living national treasure back in 2004 for cast metal work. So this vessel, the base form was cast using this unique Japanese technique of using a mixture of sand and mud to create the actual cast. And then after the vessel has been cast, Nakagawa Mamoru, he uses this tradition of hirazogan, or it's also known as kagazogan, so kaga inlay, in reference to the kaga domain that was famous for this style of inlay. And what you're seeing to the right here is an example of this historic use of kaga inlay for a stirrup. So it's a technique that utilizes inlay of different depths to which interlock with each other. So you mix and match different colors, different types of alloys to create these beautiful, intricate designs. So you'll notice that Nakagawa Mamoru has kind of abstracted and created a more graphic kind of design approach to the motifs that he's depicting here. The cranes are actually meant to be crossing from Japan into Siberia. So you see that in terms of the form of this vessel, if you actually look at it from the top, the ends are reminiscent of the tips of a sakura blossom. There are a lot of ways in which these artists are trying to push the boundaries of these of what you can express with these traditional techniques, while of course still continuing this intergenerational knowledge that they've inherited from their predecessors. And this is another example also in the collection of a cast vessel by Hasuda Shugoro. And he was known specifically for this technique. He was also a living national treasure, and he was known for this technique of casting vessels, but then using charcoal to create this unique patina on the surface. And this is a particularly rare example of this technique where you're able to achieve a kind of purplish color on the surface. So it's very beautiful, iridescent. It looks different. If you move just an inch, depending on the angle, the colors will change. And these are the kind of works that Shirley was collecting. She was thinking about, of course, traditional techniques, but also she was thinking about works that spoke to her aesthetically. And that's something that I try to explore in striking objects. As you'll notice, I mentioned earlier that the vase that was on the cover of Impressions number 44. This work is the hero piece of this exhibition. And it was partially intentional, but also unintentional, because of course Seki Yashiro is this living national treasure. He's a legend in his field. He also happened to be the mentor and teacher of many of the artists that are in this exhibition and also in the collection. But it's also just such a stunning piece, a striking piece. The pun is absolutely intended there, thinking about, the striking of metal with a hammer. But there's something about this piece, which I'll get to later, that's really helpful in terms of thinking about the impact of Seki Yashiro and the way in which his students continue to make works. So this exhibition opened in March of 2023, and it'll be on view until January 11th, 2026. So there's still some time for you to visit in person, but for those who may not be able to, I'm going to kind of give a virtual tour of the exhibition, a virtual walkthrough. So just returning to this hero object here, you'll notice in the background that there's a Japanese title for this exhibition, Kiwadatsu Katachi. So this was something that I was experimenting with in response to the fact that many of these artists that are in this exhibition, this is really the first time that they're being shown, that their works are being shown in the United States at a major museum. So I wanted to make sure that we were acknowledging the fact that these are works made in Japan. Yes, they're contemporary works, but they're made in Japan. And I wanted to be able to speak to the artists, kind of keeping in mind what it would be like for them if they were actually able to come on site and see this exhibition themselves. So this is an alternate view of the exhibition. There are actually two approaches you can take. So the first approach that you saw was one, and then this is a kind of second approach from another entrance. And you'll notice that there are quite a few cases here. And that was a very intentional decision. So when I started my role at the museum, of course, once I was able to travel to Japan, I immediately went to the annual Nihon Dento Koge exhibition, which takes place at the Mitsukoshi department store at the main branch in Nihonbashi in Tokyo, Japan. And this is an annual exhibition that takes place in the fall, in September. And the year that I attended happened to be the 70th anniversary of this exhibition. So there was a beautiful display on the first floor of Mitsukoshi department store. So there was a section for each kind of category of the Nihon Dento Kogeiten. And one of them is, of course, metalwork. So you see these metalworks here. One of the great things about this exhibition is that you don't have any plexi or glass, so you're able to see these objects. But you'll notice that um, based upon the layout of what's on the first floor, but also what's in the main exhibition, which is what you see to the right, there's really no way to see the works in the round. Walk around the object, see it from different angles. So, and not to mention, they're all kind of laid out in a line. So it's, of course, great in terms of seeing the works in relation to each other. But I really wanted to give the artists in this exhibition uh, their own shine, their opportunity to kind of show off their skills and show off their works. So, in collaboration with our longtime designer, Karen Sasaki, she actually retired right after opening this exhibition, but uh, we talked about the layout. It's only 17 works, so it's not a lot of works that are on view. What you're seeing here is a kind of 4x3 arrangement of 12 individual cases with 2 larger cases in the back. And it was really about letting the work shine, kind of letting the work speak for themselves and breathe. And this is the design that we came to. And of course, they're very, very beautifully lit by Amber Mead, who is our lighting specialist. And this is just another view of the exhibition from the back, kind of standing right in front of those 2 cases where you can see some side-by-side comparisons. But you can see that we made sure to create a lot of space, also being mindful of ADA compliance. So individuals in wheelchairs could comfortably circumambulate each of these cases. This is just another view, just to give you a sense of what these larger cases in the back look like. And in terms of the design, you'll notice that it has a double, each case has a double label deck. And this is something that I consulted our designer with because I wanted to be able to put some pieces of information on the label that are really meaningful for the artists. And I'll show you an example here. This is a work by Tanaka Terukazu, who was one of the artists in residence that Shirley sponsored at our museum. So Mr. Tanaka was able to come to our museum back in 2018, give a workshop, and also give lectures about how he came to metalworking. He's actually, I believe, a third generation metalworker. He learned directly from his father since he was a young boy, went to high school and also went to college, but ultimately this is a family tradition, a family craft that he's inherited and that he's continuing to practice. And this work is called Shimmering River, Koga, and you'll notice that on this Japanese label, I made it a point to include that it was exhibited at the 37th annual Nitten exhibition. So unfortunately, because of space constraints, and this is always a negotiation with the designer, there's only so much information that we can put on a traditional label. But I wanted to make sure that if the artist comes to this exhibition, that we're putting the information about the work that is meaningful to the artist. And in many cases, it's really the fact that these works have been exhibited at prestigious juried exhibitions. What that means is that the artists will submit their work for consideration to a jury of usually fellow artists who then decide whether or not the work is worthy of being exhibited. So it's a real honor. It's a competitive process to be able to show your work annually at these exhibitions. And then after a certain while, as you exhibit multiple times, you're able to climb up the ranks and become a member of these organizations that organize these annual juried exhibitions and maybe even become a juror yourself in the future. So this was the information that I wanted to include. And you'll see that on the other side that you have the English label with the standard information. that we usually include about the title, if known, the artist, the origin, the date, the materials used, and of course the credit line, bequest of Shirley Z. Johnson, and also the label text in English. So what this allowed us to do was to kind of experiment and see, well, what would the reaction be of the visitors. And we did an audience study, and to my great delight, the response has been very positive. And some visitors also kind of picked up on the curatorial intention I had of also having the double label deck, which was to have people first confront the Japanese text, get curious, and then walk around to the other side to read the English text. So thereby encouraging the viewer to actually take their time and walk around the case and enjoy the work from all angles. So just returning to the exhibition themes, I'll go back to this beautiful hammered silver flower vase by Sekiya Shiro, which really shows off the two techniques that he was known for. So you'll notice that the body, it was hammered out of silver, out of a plate of silver. And you'll notice these fluted ridges that kind of reminiscent of an onion. But if you look closely, the surface also has this beautiful kind of rhythmic texture, which he added, of course, by hammering. But then as you go up towards the neck, you notice that there's a clean break between the silver and then the bronze neck, which has been darkened to this kind of matte black through a patination process. So the technique that he used here to connect the silver to the bronze is called hagiawase, this joined metals technique. And it was something that he actually developed out of necessity, which I'll get to in a moment. And in terms of this vessel, it's really the only vessel in this collection that has a stamp at the bottom that shows that this was made by a living national treasure, Sekiya Shiro. And then this work is actually also by Sekiya Shiro, and it has an interesting inscription. It just says 6-3 and then a series of numbers. And so when Shirley was talking to Sekiya Shiro's students, she asked, well, do you have any idea of what this means? And this was a really important aspect also of Shirley, the fact that she would not only go to Japan multiple times a year, at least twice a year, to see these exhibitions, these annual juried exhibitions in person, but she also sought out the artists themselves. So she really developed a strong relationship with Sekiya Shiro's students. Unfortunately, Sekiya Shiro had passed away in 1994, long before Shirley began collecting his works and other examples of contemporary Japanese metalwork. But through her connections, through her friendships, she was able to ask Sekiya Shiro's students, what does this mean? What date do you think this object was probably made? And the students that she spoke to said probably 1963. And the reason is because, as you'll notice here, it's this vessel, it has this very beautiful dramatic curve. It's something that would have required a lot of hammering. The matte surface that you see here is also achieved through a type of hammering. So there's a technique where you use a funnel and you pour sand or small ball bearings, and you kind of run that process across the entire surface of this vessel. And it's a technique called parauchi. Para is the Japanese onomatopoeia for scattering something. So it's basically hammering using gravity, by using the gravitational force that pulls on those small particles. So there's a lot of hammering, a lot of noisy processes that would have been involved in making this. So the students said it's probably made in 1963 because that's the year when he really stopped just using hammering as the primary way to make interesting shapes. And this vessel here, this bud vase, is an example of using hagiase, so this joined metals technique where he took 5 different pieces of iron, he soldered it, he hammered it, and then the seams that you can see here have been also gilded using the amalgam gilding process, which is this process of essentially mixing gold with mercury. So using mercury almost as a kind of solution to carry the gold, then painting that solution onto the desired surface, and then using a torch, using heat, essentially you burn off or you make the mercury evaporate, and then you're left with the gold. And Seki Yashiro was a huge fan of this particular process of gilding. There's just something about the glow of this gilding process that he thought was really beautiful. And this, the affinity that he has for materials, the different techniques that he really honed and perfected, is something that you see that has been passed down and inherited, and then kind of innovated upon, by his students. For example, here, Onuma Chihiro is one of Seki Yashiro's students, and he's one of the 2 students who undertook the very traditional process of living with and working with his teachers. So this is, this was the traditional way to live and work with your teacher, really absorb through osmosis all the secrets, all the techniques of your teacher. And this is a work that actually uses copper as a base. So you'll notice that there's a very dynamic net, a web of running spirals across the surface of this piece. That's all achieved by hammering. So the ridges that you see there, those circular ridges, are all achieved through hammering. And of course, there's the very gentle and beautiful rhythm of hammered marks all across the surface of this vessel, which is something that you see in Seki Yashiro's work, and that Onuma Chihiro has applied here as well. And the piece is just beautiful and has this magical glow because of that amalgam gilding process, which, of course, because it uses mercury, you usually have to work with an artisan who specializes in this technique and has the proper ventilation to practice it. So these artists are definitely keeping in mind their safety, but also still pursuing the desired aesthetic that they want to achieve in their works. And then in terms of the technique of soldering and hammering, once again, this is the same student, Onuma Chihiro, who really enjoys fishing. So a lot of his works refer to water, and particularly the movement of water. So this piece is called Circular Currents, and it uses a combination of brass and silver using this technique called kiribame, a cut and soldered inlay. So once again, you see his students, taking something that they learned from their teacher, Seki Yashiro, so that technique of soldering and hammering, and then applying it to different vessel forms, and also experimenting and creating these abstracted landscapes on these metal vessels. And then this is another example by another one of Seki Yashiro's students, Suto Shotaro, who was, I think, the only other student other than Onuma Chihiro who also lived and worked with Seki Yashiro. And he created this also an abstracted landscape, but of a city. He's very adamant in saying that this is not meant to be a particular city. This is absolutely meant to be abstracted. And in this work, he's really exploring the concept of of the Buddhist concept of of nothingness, of this kind of of this kind of absence, but also of this abstraction that occurs through this meditation on the void and of nothingness. And I think that it's interesting that a work that's meant to be about a void uses this technique of kiribame, where you're cutting out sections of a vessel and then filling it in with other metals, which in this case is copper. That's the bright red that you see, and also shakudo, which is a copper and gold alloy. So a lot of the colors that you're seeing here in these works were traditionally used by metal workers who made sword hilts, sotsuba for the warrior class until swords were banned in the Meiji era. So what you're seeing is a real adaptation where you still have those traditional techniques, those patination methods, but applied to these larger works that are exploring different designs, different themes that are a radical departure from the tradition that persisted in Japan for hundreds of years. And next, I'd like to turn to this real tour de force piece by Hagino Noriko, who was also one of Seki Yashiro's students, and she's one of his female students. So one thing that is really a part of Seki Yashiro's legacy is training women metalworkers. And she started off as a jewelry designer. So that's how she became interested in metalworking. But then through her studies with Seki Yashiro, she began making much larger works. And earlier, I showed you, of course, Seki Yashiro's silver vase, the hammered vase with the brass neck that was soldered and hammered on. If you think about that piece, which is just connecting two pieces of metal, well, this piece has connected over 300 separate pieces of metal together. And you'll notice too that there are different colors here. It's a mixture of silver, gold, and the shakudo copper and gold alloy. So all of these metals have different melting points, which means that Hagino Noriko has to calculate different rates of expansion, contraction, and really engineer this piece so that no holes developed in the process of hammering and soldering these 300 pieces together. So, of course, something like this won an award in the 2016 Nihon Dento Kogeiten exhibition. So it's a real wonderful kind of evolution of the technique of Hagiawase that Seki Yashiro taught to his students. And one thing that I noticed when I was looking at Shirley's collection, of course, when I first started working, it was completely remote. We couldn't go to the museum, but once I was able to get on site, I immediately started looking at all these works in person in storage. And what I noticed was that a lot of the women were creating their own techniques. They were the ones really pushing the boundaries of these techniques that they had inherited from their teachers. And this is another artist, Otsuki Masako, who was originally a graphic design student. So she studied with teachers who were designers for Shiseido. So if you're noticing a kind of Art Deco-esque approach to design here, that's absolutely a part of her training, which is shining through in this work. And you'll notice that there's this very interesting effect that you're seeing. It's essentially a kind of representation of a fan or a series of ribbons that are kind of fanning out across this vessel. And the ridges that you're seeing that run perpendicular to the flow of this S curve, that's a distinctive technique that Otsuki Masako developed, which involves the use of a chisel to create that kind of striation on the metal surface. And then this artist, Oshiyama Motoko, she's a professor of metalworking at Bunka Gakuen. And it's inspired actually by Seisho Nagon's pillow book, her passage about spring, about akebono, haru akebono. So in spring, dawn is the best time of day. So what you're seeing is Oshiyama Motoko using these copper triangles as a kind of allusion to abstracted representation of hills that are have this red tinge because the sun is coming out. And what you see in terms of where the silver body meets this darkened kind of black border on either side. So this is a this is a technique that she created called kakuhamon, which translates to mixed metals pattern technique. So she uses an argon torch and a hammer to create these kind of painterly daubs where she's showing the transition from night into day. And then, of course, Osumi Yukie is one of Seki Yashiro's, perhaps one of the most famous of his students. She's the first woman to become a living national treasure in metalworking and in hammering specifically. And she was actually, she trained as an art historian at Tokyo University of the Arts, so Tokyo Geijutsu Daigaku. And after studying with a professor who was an expert on the history of metalworking, she decided that she wanted to make. She didn't want to research these works. She actually wanted to make works. So she apprenticed with three different teachers, one of whom happened to be Seki Yashiro. But what she did was essentially combine the knowledge from Seki Yashiro in terms of hammering, and then from two other teachers in terms of their approach to inlay. So the technique that she's really famous for is this nunomezogan textile imprint inlay technique, where she uses a chisel and creates a crosshatch pattern that is that fills out the designs that she usually brushes on the surface of these hammer vessels with ink. So she takes this painterly approach to creating her designs, but then she translates that into metal inlay, executed in gold and also lead. But then when you look at the sections of the lead inlay, it's very dark. And the reason for that is because one of her other teachers that she apprenticed with uh, was someone who really focused on bringing out different colors of the metals. So she actually uses a piece of charcoal to darken the color of the lead. But you'll also notice the subtle patina that she's created on the surface of the work. That's kind of intentional shading technique, which happens to, it seems like it's her secret. She wasn't really willing to talk very much more about it when I spoke with her in person. But the combination of all of these different traditional techniques into this one signature style is really something I think that she did on her own. She carved her own path. So yes, one of her teachers happens to be Seki Yashiro, a living national treasure, but this isn't a scenario where she inherited that distinction. She really earned that distinction, and you can see this in her works. And this is one of the cases in the back where there's a comparison between Osumi Yukie, this award-winning piece. She received this award at the 61st annual Nihon Dento Kogeiten exhibition in 2014 when she was designated as Living National Treasure. And it's a beautiful work, actually, that Shirley was really drawn to because she noticed that the hammering on the outside was as beautiful as the hammering on the inside. And this is actually not an easy thing to achieve because, you know, these metal plates, they have a certain thickness. So that doesn't mean that, that means that when you're hammering it from the outside, the design on the outside doesn't necessarily translate into the inside. So it's something that you have to really hone. You have to practice. And the work that you see to the left is by a much younger artist, Io Koichi, who's a second generation metalworker. And Shirley was always interested in his pieces, but this was another great thing about Shirley, something that really made her stand out, I think, to the artists, the Japanese artists. She was very direct. And she would say, oh, you know, I like the shape of this vessel, but I'm not a huge fan of the color. And she would be critical, but not in a bad spirit, in the spirit of encouraging and trying to challenge the artist to create more beautiful works. And when Shirley met Io Koichi, she apparently told him that she really likes the shapes of his works, but that she thinks that he could do better about his hammering to make these works look beautiful on the inside as well as on the outside. So this work that you see to the left is the first work that she commissioned. an artist to make. And Io Koichi stood up to the challenge, and he made this beautiful large piece with this swirling design. It's called Whirl Boat Vessel, and it's really become his signature style. Uh, so you see a beautiful example here of Shirley really encouraging a younger generation to make uh, better works. And I'll just end with this comparison here, which unfortunately we don't have a gallery view of these two works, but it's one of my favorite pairings because this is an unusual father-daughter pairing. So in terms of metalworking, once again, I mentioned earlier that the women artists really seem to be pushing the medium. You see Osumi Yukie kind of breaking the ceiling there in terms of becoming a living national treasure. And you also see how a father is teaching and passing down his techniques to his daughter. So, unlike most of the artists that I've shown so far, Ueda Sannen, the father, and Ueda Chikako actually live and work in Kyoto. And they primarily work with clients who are practitioners of Chanoyu, of Japanese tea. And so the work that you see to the left is by Ueda Sannen, and it's created using this process called ronagashi, which is essentially taking a silver solder and pouring it on the surface of a metal plate and then hammering the piece. So it's a really beautiful piece with that kind of rustic aesthetic. It has a rough texture as well, and you'll notice that in terms of the hammered ridges, it's not this clean line, the kind of line that you've seen with Seki Yashiro's works and the works of his students. It's kind of rough, but and it's not it doesn't go all the way across the surface. It kind of ends and doesn't really touch other lines either. So there are these crisscrossing ridges here that are hammered. And it's a beautiful piece, really brings out the color of this kuromido copper and arsenic alloy and silver. And then the work that you see to the right by Ueda Chikako, his daughter, is actually made using the exact same technique, exact same materials, but she experimented with the thickness of the plate, so it's a much thinner plate that she used. And instead of leaving the surface rough like her father did, she really polished the surface. The first time I saw it, I thought it was made out of glass. So you see the younger generation, this newer generation, inheriting these techniques, inheriting this knowledge, but then making it their own and expressing these techniques in a new way. And of course, in terms of this collection, what's really great about being able to work at the National Museum of Asian Art is having conservators and scientific researchers as colleagues. And this is a piece that was actually restored beautifully by our conservators. And there's an ongoing research project at our museum about the traditional but also newer coatings that are applied to the surfaces of these metalworks. So traditionally, there's a particular beetle that was used for creating wax that was applied to the surface of these works to prevent any kind of tarnish. But in more recent years, artists have been using acrylic lacquer coating. So our scientists have been examining these works, doing analysis, and trying to figure out, what kind of coatings are used and what the effect of these coatings are, in order to ensure that we're able to preserve these works for future generations. And this is an alternate view of the exhibition just to draw your attention to the right, where you'll notice that there's a screen. And this screen in the gallery allows our visitors to see the different techniques of hammering, of chiseling, of adding inlay that the artist Osumi Yukie, who she was actually the first artist in residence that Shirley hosted at our institution in 2014, the year that she became a National Living Treasure. So this is her hard at work, actually laying the crosshatch patterns to fit the design that she painted on the surface of this vessel. And the other artist who's also in this video is Tanaka Terukazu. So the two metalworking artists who came to our museum have kindly shared their knowledge, their resources to educate the public about these traditional techniques that they use to make beautiful works of art. And in addition to the video, we also have this case to the side. You'll notice in the lower left here, it's a case that shows metalworking tools. So I mentioned earlier that as a part of this bequest to our museum, Shirley gave us this wonderful resource of exhibition catalogs, past exhibition catalogs from the Nihon Dento Kogeten, from the Nitten, other craft-related exhibitions in Japan. So it's a great resource not only to understand metalworking, but also other so-called koge crafts in Japan, ceramics, lacquer, textiles, bamboo baskets. And in addition to those catalogs, there's also an interview or interviews with over 100 artists. So she Shirley even interviewed artists that she whose work she did not collect. So it was really about gathering knowledge with the hope that this would benefit future researchers and bring attention to contemporary Japanese metalworking as a serious field of study. And you'll notice that in the panel, in this chat panel to the left here, that there's a photograph that was taken by Alexa Balmer, who was Shirley's longtime assistant, who helped to keep track of not only the collection, but these archival materials. She was instrumental in making sure that Shirley's article was published, and all these digital photographs, videos, correspondences with artists, these are all now at our museum available for researchers. And in addition to that, of course, we have these wonderful tools. And so in terms of thinking about metalworking, it's really about the knowledge about the techniques that have been passed down that continue to be innovated upon. And there are many, many more tools than what are currently on display. As you can see here, this is actually also still a fraction of the tools that are in our collection now, in our archives. And we also have wonderful examples like this, where what you see to the left are copper cutouts, kind of mock-ups of the types of inlay that would be used on the vessel that you see to the right here by Okuyama Hoseki. So on the final piece, the metal pieces used are made out of gold and out of shakudo, so out of these expensive and beautiful alloys. But now in our archives, we have these copper mock-ups that show the kind of artistic process that goes behind the creation of these works. And this is also just a snippet of some of the catalogs that we have. And also to the right here, these are materials actually that Shirley collected that has to do with the tomobako, the Paulownia wood boxes that all of these works come in. So she was a meticulous researcher and someone who really cared about every single aspect of the works that she collected, not just the fact that these are stunning works, but even about the traditional ways in which these works are cared for based upon what kind of boxes they're stored in. So I'm just going to end my talk there. And I'd like to thank all the different colleagues, supporters who have helped me with the exhibition, but also the research, beginning with Shirley's research that she conducted as a collector. And of course, special thank you to all the artists and also their heirs who were a part of this exhibition process in terms of ensuring that our museum has the rights to share and disseminate images of these wonderful works. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, So thank you, Dr. Jung. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It was absolutely fascinating. We have time for just a few questions, but one of the questions that came up was as follows. What is the convention for metal artists to mark, that is, sign their pieces? Are the marks not on the objects, but rather on the storage boxes?
That's a great question. Thank you. So it really depends on the artist. Some artists have a stamp that they use that they apply to all the works that they have. Seki Shido was interesting because all the pieces that we have a different approach to signing um, his works, but I think it's because of that shift that occurred from when he became a national living treasure. So before and after that, that point in his career. But for the most part, artists usually like to kind of engrave their signature. So they're using a sharp tool to handwrite their signature, usually on the base of these works. And what that does too is it helps whoever owns the piece to know what the correct orientation of the vessel is.
Okay. And one more that just came in. Are there any books in English describing the techniques used in these works? Looking for something that would be instructional for metalsmiths.
Oh, I'm afraid that there isn't a technical book available. I think that a book that might be interesting is Osumi Yuki's book called Soul of Gold. So it was a book that she originally wrote in Japanese, but it was translated into English. And there she does talk about her techniques, but I don't think she goes into that much technical specificity. But that was actually the intention behind these artist in residency programs that Shirley hosted at our museum. It was really to make sure that these artists had an opportunity to share their knowledge with metalworkers here in the United States. So hopefully that's something that we'll be able to do again. But thank you for your interest.
Wow. I might try to squeeze in one more before we end. We might go over a little bit, but what is the significance of becoming a living national treasure as designated by the Japanese government?
Thank you for that question. You may have, throughout the presentation, I kept using this term living national treasure, but the more formal term is intangible, holder of intangible cultural heritage. So what that means is the works that you saw in my presentation, the works in our collection, those are not the national treasures. Those happen to be made by these holders of intangible cultural heritage. And so the knowledge that they possess, this embodied experience that they can then pass down to their students, that's what's important. And that's what the Japanese government is protecting as a national treasure. So they usually receive a stipend, which helps them to support themselves and really focus on disseminating as much knowledge as possible. So Osumi Yuki, for example, she actually teaches elementary school students how to hammer a pewter cup. That's one of the many things that she does as a living national treasure.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I'm sorry our time is up, but thank you again for doing this webinar. It just was phenomenal. And thank you everyone for listening to today's webinar, a recording of which will be posted very soon on JASA's website. And we look forward to seeing you all again throughout the rest of the year. Our next webinar will be on February 24th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time with Professor Samuel Leiter, who is a distinguished professor emeritus of theater at Brooklyn College and the Graduate Center of City University of New York. And he will be speaking about his most recent book, which is entitled Kabuki, Japanese Theater Through Foreign Eyes. We hope you can join us then. Until next time, thank you very much. Bye-bye.